She pointed at a cop and said, "Bad man," but what her dog did next shocked the court. No one expected the tension that would unfold that morning in Courtroom 3B. It was supposed to be routine, just another custody hearing, another overworked judge, another restless child. But then, 3-year-old Mira looked up from her chair, eyes wide and unblinking. She raised one trembling finger. "Bad man," she whispered. Everyone turned. She was pointing at a decorated officer, K-9 handler Nolan Graves. A chuckle rippled through the room, nervous, dismissive. Kids say strange things. But then Mira said it again, louder. "He locked me." Gasps. Silence. And then something even stranger. The officer's own dog, Kyros, lifted his head. Slowly, as if recognizing a sound buried in time. Then, without warning, he stepped forward, placing himself between Mira and the man she'd just accused. Not aggressive, just alert, protective. And that's when the real story began. The courtroom smelled faintly of wood polish and old paper-like secrets soaked into oak, like stories that had waited years for air. Sunlight streamed through the tall arched windows of Courtroom 2, warm and indifferent, painting long beams across the tiled floor. The courthouse itself, nestled in a quiet corner of a Colorado town, bore the kind of old dignity that tried not to creak under the weight of what it witnessed. Inside, the morning unfolded with quiet choreography. Clerks arranged folders, attorneys murmured at wooden tables. A bailiff double-checked his watch, already anticipating his lunch break. The judge had not yet entered, but her absence was a familiar kind of pause, like the quiet before a conductor raises the baton. Routine. Sophia Stanton sat stiffly on the second bench from the front, dressed in a gray blazer and dark jeans that still smelled faintly of detergent. Her posture was too formal for someone not on trial. She kept checking her phone, though she knew it had to be off inside the courtroom. Her fingers trembled just enough to betray her nerves. Beside her, nestled against her side, was Mira, 3 years old, small even for her age, with a head full of loose chestnut curls tied back with a pale green ribbon. Her yellow dress was creased from the car seat, and she held a soft, one-eyed plush bunny in both arms like it anchored her to the world. Sophia had tried to find someone to watch Mira that morning, but the sitter had canceled last minute, and the daycare required a 3-day notice. So when the court clerk asked if the child could remain, so long as she stays quiet, the judge had nodded in mild reluctance. And so Mira sat, still, alert, watching. The room pulsed with grown-up energy, words she didn't understand, names she'd never heard, and faces that rarely bent down to her level. But her eyes followed everything, especially the door. Sophia leaned close and whispered, "Do you want your crayons?" Mira shook her head no. "You sure? We'll be here for a while." Another shake, eyes forward. The bunny hugged tighter. Sophia exhaled slowly and tried to look composed. She was there to testify, not as an eyewitness to a crime, but as someone who had seen something. A shadow running past her kitchen window late one night 6 months ago, around the time a warehouse had been broken into. She couldn't identify the figure, but the direction, the time, the sound. They had told her it might help, and so she came. She hadn't expected to bring her daughter. She hadn't expected any of this to matter all that much. Then, at precisely 9:07 a.m., the side door to the courtroom opened. The room shifted slightly, like a temperature drop no one could name. The soft murmurs fell away, replaced by a focused hush. Through the open door walked Officer Nolan Graves, in full uniform, dark blue, polished badge, sharp jaw. And beside him, moving with silent authority, was a German shepherd. The dog was massive. Not the kind you see in dog parks or suburban backyards. He moved like a soldier. Every step was in sync with the officer, head forward, posture tall. His coat was a burnished mix of black and sable, the kind that caught light in odd ways, as though it were brushed with memory. The harness on his back bore the patch, K9 Unit, Kyros. Mira saw him the moment the door creaked open. Her little fingers tightened on the bunny. Her spine stiffened. But she didn't flinch. She didn't look to her mother for comfort or for context. She simply watched. Graves and Kyros walked to the far side of the courtroom near the prosecution table. The officer said nothing, just nodded once to the bailiff and stood at attention. Kyros sat obediently beside him, eyes forward. To the adults in the room, it was a familiar sight. Just another K9 on detail, just another officer pulling courthouse duty. But to Mira Stanton, everything inside her changed. She stared, unblinking. Her lips parted slightly, and for a moment it seemed like she might cry. But instead, she whispered. 2 words, no louder than a breath. But in the quiet of the room, they landed like a bell. Bad man. Sophia didn't hear it at first. Not really. She thought Mira might have said Batman, and turned to hush her. But then the child stood on the bench, small shoes squeaking and pointed. At Officer Nolan Graves. Mira's voice rang clearer now, still soft, but unmistakable. Bad man. Everything stopped. The stenographer's hands froze above the keys. The defense attorney lifted his head like he'd misheard a fire alarm. Judge Hartley, mid-sentence, stepping into the room, paused at the threshold. And Graves, stoic, motionless, tilted his head almost imperceptibly. His eyes darted to the girl. Sophia's face went crimson. "Mira, shh! What are you doing?" She pulled her daughter down into her lap, panic rising like heat. But Mira didn't cry. She didn't flinch. She whispered again, this time slower. "He locked me." A gasp from the back of the courtroom. The bailiff took an unconscious step forward. Sophia clutched her daughter tight, now truly afraid. "Mira, baby, what do you mean? That's not... He's a police officer." But Mira wasn't looking at her mother. She was still staring at Kyros. And Kyros moved. Very slowly, he turned his head. His ears twitched. His posture, once perfectly still, shifted. He looked at Mira. And in his eyes there was no threat, no warning, no confusion, just something unspoken, a flicker of recognition. Sophia didn't notice the change, but someone else did. The judge narrowed her eyes, and somewhere, deep inside a memory that had no words, a lock began to click open. It happened so quietly at first that most people in the room missed it. A whisper, 2 words, from a child no one had noticed until that moment. Bad man. At first it was dismissed as childish chatter, an innocent misunderstanding, perhaps a name overheard in a cartoon. But then Mira stood, small hands clenched around her worn plush bunny, eyes wide but unblinking. Her voice, though soft, carried a strange weight. It didn't tremble. It didn't seek permission. It carried memory. And then she pointed, straight at Officer Nolan Graves. A sharp intake of breath rippled through the courtroom. The judge, who had just begun adjusting her robe behind the bench, froze. The court reporter's fingers hovered over her keyboard, And at the prosecution table, ADA Lorraine Shepherd slowly turned her head, eyes narrowing not on the child, but on the man in uniform she had assumed was an ally of order. Sophia, startled, turned to her daughter. "Mira, what are you doing?" she whispered, her voice a knot of confusion and apology. "Sweetheart, shh, that's enough. He's a policeman." But Mira didn't move her arm, didn't blink. Graves stood still, his body rigid, but his jaw flexed. Once, as if the words had struck a place deeper than he expected. He didn't speak, but his silence said more than it should have. Sophia tried again, this time more urgently. "Baby, please don't point. It's not polite. He's not a bad—" "He locked me." This time the words were clearer, louder, and they shattered the room. Not just the volume, but the meaning, the verb, the clarity. Sophia's stomach turned cold, her heart stumbled in her chest. "What did you say?" she asked again, now kneeling to Mira's eye level, brushing a curl from her daughter's face, her own voice shaking. Mira's gaze didn't break. "He locked me," she repeated, eyes fixed on Graves. The tension inside the courtroom changed then, something unseen, like a tectonic shift beneath polished marble. It wasn't just uncomfortable now. It was dangerous, charged, like lightning about to find metal. The bailiff instinctively took a step toward the front, his hand moving to rest gently on the butt of his holstered weapon. Not a threat, just habit. Training. The prosecutor glanced toward the judge, who had stepped fully behind the bench, frowning. Graves' expression barely changed, but it was the stillness that betrayed him. Too perfect, too frozen. The kind of restraint that doesn't come from innocence, but from calculation. Sophia felt it too. Something primal twisted in her gut. Her hands gripped Mira's arms just a little too tightly now. "Honey, you must be thinking of something else. Remember? That was a long time ago, the block party. You got lost, but we found you, remember? The nice policeman helped us." But Mira shook her head slowly, deliberately. And now, for the first time, her voice wavered. "He pushed the dog." Silence. Everyone heard it, even Kyros. The German shepherd had been lying still beside Graves, dutiful and disciplined. But now his ears twitched, his head rose, his amber eyes turned slowly, deliberately toward Mira, and the courtroom held its breath. He didn't growl, didn't bark, but something shifted in the air around him, as if his body too had remembered. Sophia stared at the dog, at her daughter, at the man now standing a little too stiffly. "Your Honor," Ada Shepherd finally said, her voice cutting through the silence like a scalpel, "I request a brief recess. 5 minutes, possibly longer." Judge Hartley, her gavel hovering mid-air, nodded once. "Recess granted. Bailiff escort Officer Graves to my chambers, quietly." The bailiff hesitated for a fraction of a second, then nodded and approached. Graves didn't move at first, but his hands curled into fists, tight at his sides. His eyes flicked to Kyros, and for the first time since he entered the room, his mask slipped. Just a flicker fear? Recognition? Anger? It passed in a second, but it was enough. The dog stood, not at command, not at signal. Kyros rose slowly, body alert, and walked without instruction across the courtroom floor. The sound of his claws against the tile echoed louder than it should have. He stopped in front of Mira and sat, not in obedience, but in recognition. Mira stared at him, breath caught in her throat. Then she knelt, slowly, on the wooden bench, reached a small hand forward, and touched his muzzle. "He was there," she whispered. "He stayed." Sophia couldn't breathe. "He was locked too," Mira said. "In the dark, with me." Outside, the flag above the courthouse flapped in the morning breeze. The town carried on, unaware that something far bigger than a warehouse robbery had just awakened. Inside Courtroom 2, the routine had shattered, and truth, silent and buried, had started to rise on 4 legs beside a little girl who refused to forget. The room hadn't taken a breath in over a minute. After Mira's voice broke through the stillness, "He was there. He was locked too." The silence that followed wasn't hollow. It was full, packed tight with disbelief, suspicion, and something older, deeper, like guilt trying to crawl out of old uniforms and paperwork. Mira's hand still rested gently on the side of Kyros's muzzle. Her fingers didn't tremble. They pressed softly into the coarse fur, as if she were anchoring herself to a memory she had never been able to name until now. The German shepherd didn't move at first. He stood still, his head lowered, eyes meeting hers with an unsettling calm. Not blank, not mechanical. Present. Then, slowly, deliberately, he shifted. He stepped forward, away from Graves, away from the handler who had trained him, commanded him, owned him, and positioned himself directly in front of Mira, between her and everything else. Gasps swept across the benches, some subtle, some not. A defense attorney stood halfway, unsure whether to intervene. The judge's gavel remained untouched. The bailiff took one cautious step forward, then paused as Judge Hartley raised her palm. "Don't." One word. Sharp. Final. Because Kyros was not attacking. He wasn't aggressive, not threatening, but his posture had changed in a way every cop in that room understood. He wasn't guarding property. He was guarding a child. Kyros lowered his body slightly, legs squared, tail down, but still. His ears stayed pinned back, not in fear, but in deep focus, the kind that comes from readiness. The courtroom, already a brittle place, felt like it might crack. Sophia's eyes filled with tears she didn't understand. She clutched Mira close, but the child didn't move. She looked past her mother's arms into the dark eyes of the dog now standing watch, and for the first time since she'd walked into that echoing hall of polished wood and hard stairs, Mira smiled. Not wide, not for show, just a small lift at the corner of her mouth, the kind that said, "You remember too, don't you?" Kyros blinked once. He didn't wag his tail, he didn't make a sound. But in that moment, something passed between them, beyond comprehension, beyond adult logic, the kind of thing that no court transcript could capture, no file could archive. Recognition. She whispered it again, quieter now, but no less true. "He stayed with me." And then her voice, barely audible, like the breath of someone waking from a nightmare. "He was locked too." The words weren't metaphor. They weren't exaggeration. They were fact, stated not with fear but with clarity, like puzzle pieces falling into place after months of silence. Officer Nolan Graves hadn't moved, but his skin had. There was sweat now, just beneath the collar, a pulse in his temple, a rigidity in his stance that no training could disguise. The judge's eyes locked on him. She said nothing, but something behind her stare began to sharpen. The assistant district attorney, Lorraine Shepherd, stepped back from the bench, whispering to her clerk, already motioning for internal affairs. And at the far back of the courtroom, unnoticed until now, Detective Jonah Vance, a quiet observer, with a folder on his lap, closed it. Slowly, his gaze fixed on the child and the dog. The courtroom, which just 30 minutes earlier had been bracing for a routine hearing, was now shifting its center of gravity toward Mira and toward Kyros. The bailiff, unsure what to do with the breach of protocol, looked at the judge again for instruction. But again, Judge Hartley raised her hand. "He is not disrupting the court," she said. Her voice held steel. "He's testifying." That word testifying landed differently. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't symbolic. It was real. Because in a world of affidavits and protocols and redacted statements, this was the one moment where truth had chosen a different form, a little girl, and a dog who had survived with her. Sophia finally spoke, her voice breaking. "Your Honor, I don't understand. I didn't even know she remembered any of this." Judge Hartley's voice was gentle now. "Children don't forget what their bodies survived. They just don't always have the words." "And him?" Sophia asked, glancing at Kyros. Hartley turned to look at the German shepherd. "If he's anything like the dogs I've seen on the stand," she said, "then he doesn't need words either." From somewhere near the prosecution table, someone whispered, "He just picked a side." And he had, without a command, without hesitation. He had walked away from the man who fed him, trained him, held his leash, and stood beside the child who told the truth. Kyros shifted slightly, repositioning himself closer to Mira's legs, his shoulder now brushing against her shin. His stance didn't soften, but it no longer read as tension. Now it read as protection. And in that single simple act, the courtroom transformed, not into a place of law, but into a place of memory, of justice, of reckoning. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the courthouse flag against its pole. A storm was building above the town, but inside it had already begun, and in the eye of it stood a little girl, a German shepherd, and everything that could no longer be ignored. The heavy wooden doors of Courtroom 2 closed with a soft but final click. Behind them, the low hum of whispers still echoed, a room of witnesses suddenly shaken out of their morning routine. On the record, it was called a 15-minute recess, but in truth, something much heavier had just begun. Through the side corridor, beneath the aged molding and government-issued silence, Judge Evelyn Hartley strode ahead in her black robe, flanked by her bailiff and a court clerk moving quickly behind her. She said nothing as she walked. Not about the child, not about the dog, not even about the man they had both, in their own ways, just accused. She didn't need to say anything. She had already seen what mattered, the girl's clarity, the dog's shift in allegiance, and most telling of all, the crack in the officer's face when it happened. Behind her, Officer Nolan Graves followed, straight-backed, boots echoing sharply with each step on the courthouse tile. His jaw was set tight, eyes forward, posture perfect, the very image of procedural control. But the fingers on his left hand twitched just once, and Hartley noticed. They reached her chambers room 227, and the bailiff opened the door. "Inside," Hartley said simply, and walked in without looking back. The chamber was modest, quiet, lined with shelves of bound law volumes and a single-framed photo of her late father in uniform. She didn't sit at her desk, not yet. She turned and faced Graves directly, waiting until the door latched shut behind them. Then, slowly, she spoke. "You're sweating officer." Graves blinked, caught off guard by the bluntness. "Excuse me, Your Honor." She nodded toward his brow. "Not the badge, not the boots, but your temple, left side. Just started as you walked in." "And your dominant handwrite, I assume, is clenching. I'd say that's agitation." "I'm not agitated," he replied too quickly. I'm frustrated." Graves took a deep breath. "With respect, Your Honor, I don't appreciate being removed from duty and questioned over the ramblings of a child." "Is that what you think they were? Ramblings?" He hesitated, a half-beat too long. "She's 3. That's not admissible." "Not yet," Hartley said calmly. "But you and I both know that dog didn't act out of training." Graves exhaled hard, like someone trying to reset the room. "Kyros is a disciplined animal. He's been in service 3 years. He responds to emotion, children especially. What you saw was instinct, not evidence." "Interesting," Hartley murmured, stepping behind her desk. She didn't sit yet. She simply opened a drawer and pulled out a plain manila folder. "Would you mind confirming this for me?" She laid a single page on the desk. A printed report, dated 6 months ago. A minor missing persons incident. A child temporarily lost during a neighborhood block party. Found hours later inside an old warehouse near the freight line. Child unharmed. No further action required. Graves barely glanced at it. "That's routine," he said. "Read the name." He did. Mira Stanton. There was a pause. A long one. "Small world," Hartley said. "She was found behind a locked metal door. The shed had no internal handle. You were listed as the responding officer." "I remember. I found her. She was confused. Maybe fell asleep inside. Door probably latched accidentally. We've seen it before." Hartley's eyes didn't blink. "Her mother said she had scratches, bruises, but your report says no visible trauma." Graves looked up, mask back on. "I didn't see any injuries. If there had been something more serious, I would have reported it." "And now," she said, folding her hands, "that same child who, according to your own report, you found and released without issue, has just identified you in open court. She's confused. She's specific. She's scared. She's not the only one." That landed. And finally, his hand twitched again. For the first time, Graves's carefully neutral expression faltered. His lips parted slightly, then closed again. He glanced at the wall behind Hartley, then down at his boots. "Do you deny having prior contact with her beyond that one report?" the judge asked. "I do." "Do you deny Kyros was with you at the time?" He paused. "Too long. I don't recall." "That," she said, voice now like cold iron, "is the first lie I've heard out of your mouth." Graves straightened, tone rising. "You're treating me like a suspect over something a toddler said. This is ridiculous. The dog can't talk. You have no idea what this looks like from the outside." "I do," Hartley said. "It looks like a child with no agenda pointed at a decorated officer and whispered something most adults would never be brave enough to say. And a dog, your own dog, walked away from you." She sat now, calm, firm. "It looks, Officer Graves, like something inside that courtroom just broke, and it started with you." Graves didn't respond. He stood there, jaw tight, hands now behind his back, like a soldier at attention. But the sweat had reached his collar, and the room no longer felt like a chamber of law. It felt like a place where truth had stopped knocking and started pushing. The witness waiting room was too quiet for a child. No cartoons playing, no scribbles on the table, no second-hand toys tossed in a basket, just vinyl chairs that stuck to bare legs and a humming wall clock that made each passing second feel like a held breath. Sophia Stanton sat hunched forward on one of the chairs, arms wrapped around her daughter like she could shield her from things already past. Mira was small against her chest, her head tucked just beneath her mother's chin, Bunny still clutched tight. The same faded green ribbon in her hair now drooped over one eye. Neither of them had said anything since the courtroom. Until the knock. Tap, tap. Then the door opened with a low creak, and a man stepped in. Older, careful, not in a hurry. His badge hung on a leather lanyard against his plain blue button-down shirt. No gun on his belt, no sharp voice, just presence. Detective Jonah Vance was not new to this. He'd seen trauma walk and talk in 1,000 different ways. Some wore rage, some wore silence, and some, like Mira, just held it in the smallest palms imaginable. He crouched down, not on one knee like people always did when talking to children, but fully sitting on the floor, cross-legged, like he wasn't in a rush to leave. "Hi, Mira," he said softly. "My name's Jonah. Some people call me Vance. You can call me whichever feels better." Mira didn't answer, but her bunny's ear twitched where her fingers squeezed it. He glanced up at Sophia. "Is it okay if I ask her a few things? You can stay right here." Sophia nodded, her lips pressed together. Her arms didn't loosen, but she did lean back enough to give Mira space to breathe. Vance turned back to the little girl. "I was in the room earlier. I saw Kyros come up to you." At that, Mira blinked. A small shift, a foot tucked tighter under her dress. "He's a good dog," Vance continued. "Real smart. You knew him before today, didn't you?" Silence. Vance's voice didn't change. It was warm, but not soft. It didn't talk down. "I wanted to ask, do you remember where you saw him?" Mira's face stayed hidden for a few seconds longer. Then she turned her head just enough that one eye peeked out from under the ribbon. "In the dark place," she whispered. Sophia gasped, quiet but sharp. Vance didn't flinch. He simply nodded. "Can you tell me more about the dark place?" "It was cold," Mira said. Her voice wasn't scared, just distant, like she was walking backwards into something old. "And it smelled like metal." Vance's pencil moved once on his notepad. That was all. Sophia's hands trembled now. She covered them with her purse. "What else do you remember, Mira?" The girl looked down at her bunny. She adjusted its bent ear like smoothing memory into place. "There was barking," she said. "It echoed." "Who was barking?" Mira lifted her eyes again, this time directly at Vance. "The dog, Kyros. He barked at the man." Vance swallowed once, slowly. "Was it the same man from today?" Mira nodded. Sophia turned to Vance, tears forming now. "She never said anything before. Never. After we found her, she just shut down for a while. We thought she didn't remember." Vance didn't take his eyes off the child. "What did the man do when the dog barked?" Mira's hand stilled. She looked up again. "He pushed him." The words hit the room like ice water. Vance's notepad closed. "How?" "With his boot," she said. "He said, 'Shut up,' and he pushed him back into the cage." Sophia turned white. Vance reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a small tissue, offering it to her without a word. Then he asked, gently, "What did Kyros do after that?" Mira's voice grew quieter now, nearly inaudible, but her lips moved clearly. "He sat by the door. He didn't leave." Vance didn't speak. He couldn't, not for a beat, because those words didn't come from a storybook. They didn't come from cartoons or nightmares. They came from being there. "He sat by the door," Mira repeated, almost to herself. "He stayed." Sophia wiped her face, her chest rising and falling like she was trying to breathe underwater. "We only lost her for 2 hours, she whispered. "It was just 2 hours. We were at the block party, and the next thing we knew she was gone. They said she wandered, that the shed locked from the inside, but she had bruises, I remember. And we just believed the report." "Who responded?" Vance asked, already knowing. "An officer. I don't remember his name. Everything was happening so fast, lights, sirens. He said he found her near the train yard." Vance stood slowly now, his knees creaking. He looked at Mira, who was now hugging her bunny to her chest again, face resting against her mother's arm like the storm inside her had broken just a little. "Thank you for telling me," he said. "That was really brave." Mira didn't respond, but her hand crept outward, toward the side of the chair, a small, searching palm, and Vance, careful, extended one finger. She touched it, just once. Then she let go, and said nothing more. The overhead lights in the waiting room had begun to flicker faintly, a small hum, fluorescent and tired. Outside, courthouse footsteps passed in muffled rhythms, none of them stopping here. Detective Jonah Vance leaned against the side counter now, his notepad closed, gaze distant. But his mind was moving fast, quicker than his voice would betray. Across from him, Sophia Stanton sat frozen, still trying to reconcile what her daughter had said and what she herself had ignored. Mira had fallen asleep in her lap, her fingers still looped around the bunny's ear, her breathing soft, steady. The storm inside her, at least for now, had ebbed. But Sophia's voice cut through the quiet, jagged and low. "I remember thinking the door didn't make sense." Vance turned to her. "The one she was found behind," she clarified. "The shed near the train depot. It had a sliding bolt on the outside. They told me it must have slid shut by accident when she wandered in, that it happens, that she was lucky." Her hand gripped the side of the chair like it was the only solid thing in the world. "We were so relieved to find her. We didn't ask questions. We didn't want to." Vance stepped forward, speaking evenly. "Do you remember who the responding officer was?" Sophia shook her head. Everything was so chaotic. Lights flashing, radios, neighbors crowding around. There were uniforms everywhere. One man came to the house later, asked for a short statement. Dark hair, calm, professional. He patted Mira on the head, said she was a tough one. Jonah Vance's lips pressed into a thin line. "Did he give you a name?" "No, but I signed a copy of the report. It was brief, a one-page incident form." Vance nodded once. "With your permission, I can pull the report." Sophia looked down at her daughter, then back up. "Pull it." He didn't hesitate. He stepped out into the hallway, signaling a nearby clerk with a low voice, his badge flashing. "I need the incident file for a missing juvenile. Mira Stanton. October 3rd. Search radius was called off once she was found near East Rail Line. Should be marked resolved within 2 hours of call." The clerk blinked. "That far back?" "Pull it," he repeated, tone firm. "Now." It took 6 minutes. The kind of 6 minutes that stretched like wet rope. When the file came back, it was thin, only 2 pages, including the intake. The summary was generic. Child located by patrol within storage facility. No physical harm noted. Child was assessed and returned to guardian. Scene cleared. But Vance wasn't reading that. He was reading the box in the bottom left. Responding officer. Graves, N. Badge number 64112. His fingers tightened on the paper. He walked back into the room. Sophia was still holding Mira, humming quietly, her voice shaky. The moment he stepped inside, she looked up, searching his face for confirmation she didn't want. He handed her the paper without a word. She took it with slow hands. Her eyes scanned the lines once, then froze. Graves. Vance nodded. Nolan Graves. Same man from today. Her lips parted, but no words came. A beat passed, then another. And then, he said he found her. He did, Vance replied softly. But it's what he didn't report that matters more. Sophia's fingers brushed over the no physical harm noted line. Her head shook. That's a lie, she whispered. She had cuts on her shins, bruises up her arm. You documented any of it? No. The hospital said she was stable, just dehydration. They said kids bruise all the time. You were in shock. I didn't question a police report, she said bitterly. Why would I? Vance didn't answer. He didn't need to. He pulled out his phone and opened the photo app. May I? He asked gently, gesturing to Mira. Sophia hesitated, then nodded. She scrolled through an old folder on her device labeled October Weekend until she found it. A blurry picture. Mira in pajamas, the night after she'd been found, sitting on the couch with Bunny in hand and a line of bandages down her right leg. Sophia showed it to him. Vance examined the timestamp. His jaw clenched. This, he said, doesn't match what's on the record. Sophia leaned forward. You think he... I don't think, Vance said. I see. A report that omits injury. A locked facility that couldn't be accessed from inside. And now a child 6 months later, identifying the man in a room full of strangers. That's not random. She looked at him with something between hope and terror. What do you do next? I file for a sealed warrant, Vance said. And I dig. Sophia looked down at Mira, still sleeping peacefully against her chest. She brushed a strand of hair from her daughter's temple. What if this goes nowhere? She asked, barely audible. What if they don't believe her? Vance folded the report into his coat pocket. Then we listen to the one who does. Sophia looked up confused. He nodded toward the door. To the dog. Courtroom 2 had grown colder, not in temperature but in tone. When the recess ended, people returned to their seats slower than before. The same sunlight poured through the windows, but it didn't feel warm anymore. The wooden benches creaked under the weight of silence, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. And standing near the front, between the second row and the aisle where attorneys typically passed through, was a German shepherd who refused to sit. Kyros. He stood tall, still, and silent, his frame tense, but not aggressive. His body was positioned exactly between the bench where Mira now sat with her mother and the side door where Officer Nolan Graves had previously entered. He hadn't moved from that spot since the girl touched his fur. He hadn't been commanded. He hadn't been leashed. And no one in the courtroom dared ask him to move. The bailiff had whispered about it to the judge. The judge had shaken her head. "Let him stay where he is," she had said quietly. "Let him decide." And so he stood, like a sentinel, like a soldier, like something that remembered what a child should never have had to. Sophia glanced at him several times, unsure what to do, still unsure if any of this was even real. Mira, now awake, leaned against her mother's side again, quiet, gaze flicking toward Kyros every few seconds like she was checking to make sure he was still there. Because if he was, then maybe the memories didn't have power anymore. If he was, then maybe she wouldn't be alone again. On the other side of the room, Detective Jonah Vance returned, a folder tucked under his arm, his pace measured but unreadable. He didn't go directly to the judge. Instead, he paused by the prosecutor's table and whispered something to ADA Lorraine Shepard. Her brow furrowed. She nodded once, scribbled a note, all while Kyros continued to hold his ground. At one point, a court clerk entered the room through a side panel to hand over a document. The door clicked. Kyros's head turned sharply, eyes locked. The clerk froze mid-step. Kyros didn't growl. He didn't move forward. But his body shifted just enough to let the room know he was watching now, and he wasn't finished. Then, as if satisfied, he returned to his post. Mira reached down toward the floor, not to call him, not to summon, just to let her hand dangle close enough for him to feel her. And he did. He brushed his nose across her fingers, once quiet, familiar. A low whine escaped him. It wasn't fear. It was something older, something mournful. And it happened just as someone across the room whispered Graves' name. That's when the reaction became undeniable. Kyros's head lifted higher. His shoulders stiffened, his tail lowered but not tucked. This wasn't submission. This was bracing. Every trained handler in that room recognized the signs. Kyros wasn't being defensive. He was being protective. Not in the way canines are taught to guard evidence or territory. No, this was different. This was personal. The judge glanced over at the dog from her bench, a slight narrowing in her eyes. Then her gaze shifted to Mira. The child had not reacted to the name, but the dog had, and now so had the room. Lorraine stood slowly, voice calm but deliberate. "Your Honor, with your permission, I'd like to make a brief note for the record." Judge Hartley nodded. "The K-9 currently present in this courtroom," she began, "has responded to verbal cues unprompted in relation to the subject of an active investigation. While we understand dogs are sensitive to environmental changes, I believe it would be prudent to acknowledge his behavior formally." "Are you making a motion?" the judge asked. "Not yet," Lorraine said, "but I am watching. So is he." All eyes returned to Kyros, and still he did not sit. He did not relax. He kept watching that door like it was a wound that hadn't closed. Sophia leaned down to whisper in her daughter's ear, "Do you want to move back a row?" Mira shook her head. "Why not?" "Because he hasn't moved yet," Mira whispered back. She didn't say Kyros's name. She didn't need to. Sophia looked at the dog again, and suddenly all her doubt, the impossible nature of what her daughter claimed, the logic she clung to in defense of normalcy, began to fray, because there was no logical reason for this. And yet it was happening anyway. Judge Hartley leaned slightly forward. She didn't call the court to order. She didn't bang the gavel. She just said, almost quietly, "Let the record reflect. The child is not the only one remembering." Detective Jonah Vance had reviewed thousands of reports in his career, some incomplete, some inconsistent, and a few that were outright fraudulent. But the one resting open in his hands now, this one was quietly poisoned. He stood just outside Courtroom 2, under the glow of an old hallway light, flipping through the incident report on Mira Stanton's disappearance 6 months earlier. It was slim, clinical. The language was polished to the point of erasure. Child recovered without injury. No signs of struggle. Returned to mother at scene. That was it. Not a single note about bruises, not a line about scratches, no trauma protocol activated, no follow-up recommendation, no statement from a guardian or secondary officer, and certainly no mention of the shed's external lock or that the child had been found in a structure that legally should have required a warrant to enter, but it was the signature at the bottom that cinched it. Graves, Nolan. Vance exhaled through his nose. Not angry, not surprised, just tired. He closed the file and turned back toward the courtroom, pushing the door open slowly. The room was hushed again. The air pulled taut, like someone had wrapped silence around every beam and bench. Kyros still stood, still in the exact same spot, between the girl and the door. Vance's eyes swept the room as he walked past the prosecution table and approached Sophia, who sat with her hand lightly over Mira's back, like a mother guarding the softest part of the storm. He knelt beside her, lowering himself to eye level, not for drama, but so his voice could stay soft. "I got the file," he said. Sophia looked at him with that same breath-held expression, equal parts dread and need. "And?" He held it out to her. She opened it. And then she saw. Her mouth moved, not to speak, just reacting, processing. "No injuries," she whispered, reading aloud. "No trauma noted." She stared longer. "There's no record of her being examined by anyone." "No," Vance confirmed. "There wouldn't be if the officer didn't request it. The responding officer has discretion in cases like these, if the child seems physically stable." "But she wasn't," Sophia snapped, her voice still quiet but now ragged. "She was bruised. She was bleeding." Vance nodded. "Do you still have the photos?" he asked. Sophia reached into her bag without hesitation. She pulled out her phone, scrolling quickly, then stopping on one image taken late at night, blurry and dim. Mira sat curled in a blanket, one leg extended, a visible gash across her knee, faint bruising along her shin. Another photo taken the next day showed the same marks more clearly, yellowing at the edges. "I took them in case I needed them for daycare," Sophia said, her voice shaking. "I thought they might ask. I didn't think—" "You did everything right," Vance interrupted gently. "No," she said bitterly. "I believed them." He didn't answer that. There wasn't a clean way to. Instead, he took the phone, held it next to the incident report, and stared. Two realities, side by side, one with timestamps, color, blood, a mother's memory, and one dressed in ink and formatting, designed to erase. He turned to ADA Lorraine Shepard, who had been watching from the prosecution table. "I want this entered as supplemental evidence," he said, loud enough for the judge to hear. "What exactly are we adding?" Judge Hartley asked from the bench. Vance stepped forward, file in one hand, phone in the other. "A discrepancy," he said flatly, "between Officer Graves' report and the truth." Shepard rose from her seat. "Your Honor, I formally request the report be reviewed for integrity, and the responding officer's prior incident history pulled within the hour." "Granted," Judge Hartley replied without pause. Then her eyes shifted to the girl, to the dog, and to the man not in the room, but whose name now loomed over it like a shadow. Later that hour, in the courthouse conference room, Vance laid both the file and the photographs on a table surrounded by assistant DAs and internal affairs liaisons. He tapped the last line on the report. Child located by patrol within structure. He turned over the second photo of Mira's bruised leg. This report doesn't lie with words. It lies with what it refuses to say. One of the deputies leaned in. This was just one case, right? Vance shook his head slowly. This was just the first one we believed was harmless. And then he said what no one wanted to hear, but everyone needed to. Start pulling every juvenile recovery report with Graves's badge number on it from the last 3 years. He looked toward the window where Kyros now lay, half asleep, but ears twitching at every unfamiliar name. Because there's a dog in this building who remembers what the files tried to forget. The air inside the interview room was always cold. It was part design, part psychology. Cold made people uncomfortable, made them impatient, made the truth a little harder to hold in their chest. Officer Nolan Graves sat alone at the steel table, elbows braced, hands clasped so tightly that his knuckles had begun to pale. The room's overhead fluorescent bulb buzzed softly, just off-key enough to be maddening if you sat long enough. He'd been in this room before, but never on this side of the table. The door opened without a knock. Detective Jonah Vance stepped in with the same calm gravity he always carried. No folder this time, no theatrics. Just a clipboard, and a voice that could bleed a man dry with nothing louder than a question. Graves didn't look up right away. He wanted to project control, but he was already losing it. Vance sat without a word, clicked his pen once, then again, and waited. "Is this supposed to be an interrogation?" Graves finally asked, his voice tight. "Because I'm not under arrest." Vance shrugged slightly. "No one said you were." He opened the clipboard, flipping to the page underneath. The top was blank. The second page held a printed photo of Mira's bruised leg, time-stamped, dated 2 hours after her disappearance. He turned it toward Graves. "Do you remember this?" Graves stared at the image. Not long, just enough to register it. Then he leaned back in his chair. "No," he said simply. "Never saw that before." "You filed a report saying she had no injuries." "She didn't, not that I could see. The kid was barely verbal, crying, disoriented. A lot of kids bruise when they're out running." "She was locked inside a shed," Vance replied, "with a bolt on the outside." "I didn't bolt it," Graves snapped. "I found her there. I got her out." No body cam footage of the moment. No partner to verify, no trauma follow-up requested. Graves leaned forward now, voice low. "If you're implying I hurt that girl, I'm asking what you remember." They stared at each other for a long beat. Vance's voice softened just slightly. "Was Kyros with you that day?" Graves's jaw twitched. "I don't recall." Vance tilted his head. "You don't recall whether your K-9 was with you during an active missing child case?" "I respond to dozens of calls," Graves said. "You think I catalog every leash I carry?" "This wasn't just a leash," Vance replied. "This was a girl, alone, locked in a building she couldn't enter on her own. She said you were there. She also said the dog was there." Graves's eyes flickered for the first time. A single, involuntary flinch. Vance saw it and pressed. "She said he barked, that you told him to shut up, that you pushed him with your boot." Graves looked away. Fast, but not fast enough. "She's 3 years old," he muttered. "Kids say all kinds of things. Half the time they're parroting stuff they hear in cartoons." Vance didn't move, didn't raise his voice. Kyros stood between her and the courtroom door today, he said. He didn't sit. He didn't look to you. He looked at her. Graves stayed silent. He knew her, Vance added. Still no answer. So I'll ask again, he said, voice sharper now. Was Kyros with you when you found Mira Stanton? Graves's mouth opened, but nothing came out. He blinked once, twice. Then, with the faintest crack in the mask, "It's a dog," he said. "He doesn't talk." "But maybe he remembers," Vance answered, quiet as snowfall. And the room went still again. Graves looked down at his hands, still locked together. The skin beneath his wedding ring was raw, something Vance noted but didn't mention. "You've had him 3 years," Vance said after a pause. "Which means you trained him, fed him, slept beside him in squad cars. He trusted you." Graves didn't look up. "But he walked away from you today," Vance continued. "No command, no hesitation. He chose a child he hadn't seen in half a year." Graves clenched his jaw. "He's not a person. He doesn't choose." "You sure?" Silence again. Only the buzz of the light filled the space between them now. Vance stood slowly, collecting the clipboard. "No more questions right now," he said. "But one day soon, someone else is going to sit in this chair across from you, and they'll have more than a photo." He stepped toward the door. Graves finally spoke. His voice was lower now, rasped. "What do you want me to say? That a dog knows more than I do?" Vance turned the knob. "No," he said without looking back. "I want you to admit that you're afraid he does." And with that, he walked out, leaving the officer alone with a photo, a memory, and a crack that was no longer just visible. It was spreading. The conference room was quiet, emptier than the courtroom, but heavier somehow. No gavel, no public gallery, just a rectangular table, laminated flooring, and 4 people who understood what it meant when silence spoke louder than testimony. At the center of the room sat Kyros, motionless except for the slow, steady rise and fall of his chest. No leash held him, no command bound him. Yet he didn't move. He simply waited. Across from him stood Dr. Annabelle, a trauma behaviorist with 20 years of field work, most of it with combat veterans and retired K-9 units from military and law enforcement branches. Her presence was subtle. Slacks, a cotton blouse, no lab coat, no clipboard. The only sign of her credentials was the black lanyard around her neck and the softness in her voice. "You said he hasn't been touched since the hearing?" she asked. Detective Vance nodded. "Not unless he initiated it. No growling, no avoidance. But he refuses to go back into a squad vehicle, any vehicle actually." Bell crouched slowly, not with caution, but with respect. Kyros turned his head slightly, eyes calm, watching her. "I'd like to examine him for physical trauma," she said aloud, not for Vance's benefit, but for Kyros's. Her tone was clear, warm, seeking permission, not compliance. Kyros blinked once. She took that as a yes. Gently, she extended her hand, not to pet, not to scratch behind the ears like some eager stranger, but palm open, flat, facing up. Kyros sniffed it once, then stepped forward. Just one paw's length. It was enough. "Good boy," she murmured. "May I lift the harness?" He didn't flinch. She moved with trained precision, unclipping the side straps and slowly peeling the service harness back from his shoulders. As the thick layer slid down, the room exhaled and revealed. What the uniform had hidden was a map of pain, Patches of scar tissue, dull and discolored, ran beneath Kyros's coat along the curve of his ribs. Faint, but unmistakable. Raised lines, uniform in width, lined his underbelly like someone had lashed him systematically. Near his left flank, an older burned circular, red-edged, partially healed hid just beneath where the harness had rested. Belle's hand stopped mid-air. She didn't speak right away, neither did Vance, because what they were looking at was not the wear and tear of a working dog. It was something else. Something darker. Something that hid beneath the badge. "I've seen this kind of pattern before," Belle said finally, voice lower now. "In dogs trained using coercive dominance methods. Sometimes underground handlers, sometimes abusive corrections officers." She traced her fingers an inch above the skin, not touching, just reading. These scars weren't from fights. They weren't from accidents. They were delivered. Measured. She looked at Vance. "This dog has been punished deliberately and repeatedly." Vance felt his throat tighten. "By whom?" Belle hesitated, then stood and looked directly at him. "By someone who knew exactly how to hurt him, without leaving visible marks when the vest was on." The weight of that sentence hung in the room like smoke. Kyros sat still, unmoving, as if he already knew what she would find. Belle stepped back, her voice softer now. "May I touch his hind leg?" Vance nodded. She gently lifted Kyros's left rear paw, then pressed 2 fingers just above the hock feeling along the tendon line. Kyros didn't pull away, but a quiet sound escaped his throat. Not pain, something deeper. A memory made soundless. She found what she was looking for, a healed fracture, thin, old, likely untreated. Belle rose slowly. "That's not just trauma," she said. "That's restraint." She motioned to the faint rub marks along the top of his forelimbs. "You see this? He's been tethered, repeatedly, probably in a low cage or a crate that wasn't made for containment. More like punishment. Solitary." Vance's eyes narrowed. "Like the rusted kennel we found in Graves's storage unit." Belle nodded grimly. "Yes, exactly like that." She took a long breath, then crossed the room, lowering herself back to Kyros's level once more. But this time she looked him fully in the eyes. "You stayed," she whispered. Kyros's ears shifted forward. "You stayed even when you were hurt, even when he told you not to, didn't you?" Kyros blinked again, then slowly leaned forward, resting the side of his head against her knee, a gesture of exhaustion, of release, of acknowledgement. And Annabelle, who had spent years watching the broken struggle to trust again, placed one hand gently against his chest. "I believe you," she said. Behind her, Vance exhaled, and for the first time since the case began, it felt like someone had finally heard the dog. The consultation room had been rearranged. The courthouse staff had brought in a soft beanbag chair for Mira, a small tray of juice boxes, and a pack of crayons no one had opened yet. On the far side, Kyros lay curled near the door, calm but watchful, his breathing slow. He had eaten nothing since the hearing. He hadn't needed to. He had work to do. And now, Dr. Annabelle sat on the floor beside the beanbag, legs crossed, posture relaxed, voice even. She had removed her ID badge, tucked it away. Names and titles didn't matter in this space. Only truth did. Mira sat quietly, drawing slow loops with a green crayon on the back of a file folder someone had handed her. The lines weren't shapes, just motion, circles, spirals. Next to her, her bunny sat upside down. Sophia watched from the corner, heart in her throat, hands in her lap. Anna tilted her head slightly and said, "Kyros is very brave." Mira didn't look up, but her crayon paused mid-loop. "I met him for the first time today," Anna continued. "But he already told me a lot." Mira looked up now. Her voice was soft. "He doesn't talk." "No," Anna smiled. "Not the way we do. But dogs have other ways. They remember with their bodies." Mira's eyes shifted toward Kyros. "He remembers you," Anna said gently. "And I think you remember him too." A long pause. Then Mira whispered, "He barked." Anna stayed still. "At who?" Mira's lips pressed together. Her fingers curled around the crayon. Then, in a whisper almost lost in the air, "The man." Anna didn't blink, didn't lean in. "What happened when he barked?" Mira looked down at her hands. "He said to stop." "Who did?" "The man," Mira answered. "He said, 'Shut up,' and he pushed him." "How did Kyros act?" The crayon dropped onto the carpet. Mira looked straight at Anna now. "He sat by the door." Her voice didn't shake. "He didn't leave." The room stood still. Even Sophia, seated across the room, covered her mouth with one hand. Anna's eyes filled with something too old to name. "He stayed with you." Mira nodded. "I screamed once," she said quietly, "because the dark was so big. And he was hurt." Anna tilted her head. "How do you know he was hurt?" Mira rubbed her arm where a scar had once been, long faded now. "He limped, and he made that noise like—" She paused, then mimicked a soft, choked whine in her throat. "Like that." Anna nodded. "Yes, that's how they cry." Mira's voice barely made it to the room. "I wanted to tell him sorry, but I couldn't talk then." Sophia wiped her eyes quietly. Anna reached for a small notepad. Not to record the moment, just to offer it. She handed it to Mira. "Do you want to draw what the room looked like?" Mira hesitated, then picked up the dropped green crayon. "No window," she said, "just a door, and Kyros was here." She drew a small circle, then another, like a figure curled up. Anna waited. Mira drew a line. "This is me." Then she drew a jagged shape. "The box. I slept on it, but he didn't." "Why not?" Mira looked up, blinking slowly. "He was watching." Anna didn't speak for a while. She looked over at Kyros, still at the door, still watching. When she turned back, Mira had added something else, a small red dot, just a circle. "What's that?" Mira tapped it with her crayon. "The lock." Sophia's breath caught. Anna swallowed once, her voice quiet. "How did you get out, Mira?" The little girl blinked like the question had never occurred to her. "I don't remember." "That's okay." "I just woke up," Mira added, "and Mommy was there." Anna closed her notebook slowly. She turned toward the door. "Kyros," she said gently. The dog looked up. Anna tapped her knee. Kyros rose, stretched once, then padded across the room. He didn't go to Anna. He went straight to Mira and sat beside her again. The same way he had before, the same way he had when it mattered. Mira looked up at him. She didn't cry. She just leaned forward and pressed her forehead to his, and whispered the words only he needed to hear. "You didn't leave." It was one of those rare moments when no one in the room spoke, not out of fear, but reverence. Kyros lay beside Mira, his body curved slightly around her beanbag chair like he'd been placed there with careful intention. But no one had given him that order. No one had instructed him to sit, to stay, to protect. He had done that on his own. Now, Mira reached out again, small fingers brushing lightly through the thick fur behind his ear, where the coat grew softer, untouched by scars. The kind of touch only a child could give, uncalculated, honest. And Kyros didn't flinch. He leaned in, not cautiously, not with the stiff tolerance of a working dog trained to endure human contact. He melted into the space beside her, and slowly, his eyes drifted shut. Dr. Annabelle watched from just a few feet away, arms loosely crossed, her breath held inside her chest. She'd seen dogs shake off trauma, seen them twitch under hands that reminded them of pain, seen them hide inside obedience, shut down completely. But she had never seen this. A dog whose scars still whispered beneath his skin, choosing to let go, choosing her. Sophia remained seated at a distance, holding her breath, too, unsure what would break the moment first. A word, a cough, or her own guilt, because watching it was undeniable. Mira hadn't just remembered. She had been remembered back. Anna moved closer, slow, deliberate, settling cross-legged again just behind Mira. She spoke softly. "Kyros isn't just calm," she said. "He's trusting her. Completely." Mira didn't respond, but she didn't need to. Her hand continued its slow rhythm, trailing from his ears down to his shoulder. Her touch was confident now, not hesitant, not seeking permission, like she had done this before. Anna's eyes lingered on the dog's body, posture muscles relaxed, tail still, chest rising in slow waves. He's not displaying any defensive behaviors, no guarding, no nervous yawns, no redirected gaze. "What does that mean?" Sophia asked, her voice quiet. "It means," Anna said gently, "that this isn't just memory. This isn't even just trauma." She turned slightly. "This is loyalty, the kind you don't train, the kind that's chosen." Sophia swallowed hard. And the way he leans into her? That's submission, not because he's beneath her, but because he trusts she's safe. Dogs don't do that with abusers. They don't even do that with handlers who broke trust. Vance had entered quietly during the moment, standing just inside the doorway, watching from the threshold. He spoke now. "So, he's confirming it." Anna nodded. "He's confirming everything she said without a word." Kyros stirred slightly as Mira shifted, then repositioned herself beside him, curling her legs under her like she had done this 100 times before. "Did he—" Sophia began, then hesitated. "Did he remember the moment he saw her?" Anna gave a small, bittersweet smile. "No. He remembered long before that." Sophia blinked. "You don't forget the person you stayed alive for," Anna added. Outside the conference room, voices passed in the hallway. Phones rang, footsteps echoed on marble business as usual for a courthouse. A world too busy to notice that something remarkable was happening behind one door. A child who hadn't been believed, a dog who couldn't speak, and a connection that made both of them impossible to deny. Vance stepped forward, lowering himself next to Anna. Could this behavior be faked? He asked carefully. Anna gave a slow shake of her head. Not like this, she said. You can train a dog to sit, to guard, to alert, but you can't train them to grieve. Kyros let out a slow exhale and nuzzled Mira's arm once, his nose tucking into the fabric of her sleeve like he recognized it. Maybe he did. Maybe it smelled like 6 months ago. Maybe it smelled like survival. Mira smiled softly, almost a secret smile, and whispered so quietly that only Kyros could hear it. You're not locked anymore. The dog's ears twitched once. Then he closed his eyes again. And for the first time in 6 months, Mira leaned back, not into her mother's arms, but against him, like she finally believed he wasn't going anywhere, like the part of her that had stayed locked behind a door in the dark had just been found. The warehouse sat at the edge of town like a leftover secret. 1-story, corrugated tin roof, windows long since shattered and replaced by plywood sheets bleached gray by weather. Vines crept up one side like time itself had tried to cover the place with silence. The freight yard behind it had been decommissioned 5 years ago, but the fence still stood chain-link, rusting, coiled with barbed wire no one had bothered to remove. Detective Jonah Vance stepped out of his unmarked sedan just after noon. The sun was high, but the light here felt colder, diluted by the weight of what had been hidden in this place. He didn't rush. He walked slow, methodical, boots crunching against gravel that had been forgotten since the last delivery truck left this part of the industrial zone. In his hand was a printout of the incident report, still marked Resolved. In his jacket pocket, a flash drive with photographs from that night, unearthed from Sophia's phone. And inside his chest, a slow, burning certainty. This wasn't just a location. It was a crime scene that had never been called one. He stopped at the side door of the warehouse, the one described in the original report. Mira had been found just beyond it, disoriented, dirty, but unharmed, according to the lines Graves had typed. Vance crouched, gloved his hand, and examined the lock. It was still there. Old, heavy-duty, external, a bolt and latch system designed for security, not accident, not something a child could operate from the inside, certainly not engage once she'd entered. He followed the bolt with his fingers, no internal release, no spring mechanism, just steel on steel. He stood up slowly, exhaling through his nose. Then he took out his phone and snapped a picture. Not just of the lock, but of the scale, the height, the position. Evidence that required no narrative, because the truth was in the physics. You couldn't accidentally lock a child inside a door like this, not unless someone was on the outside. Vance stepped back, circled the structure, eyes scanning for angles, places a patrol car might have parked unnoticed. Tire tracks were long gone, but the layout remained, the distance from the fence, the visibility from the street. How easy it would be to tell a frightened child to stay inside for just a moment. He took another photo, this time from the alley behind, where a side gate gave access to the rear loading zone. There, tucked in shadow, was a low stack of rusted pallets and a dented utility box. Easy to miss, easier to use. He stood there for a while, not because he expected Graves to appear, but because he was imagining what Kyros had seen, the inside of the structure, the echo of his own barking, the voice yelling, "Quiet!" The girl, small and afraid, hiding behind a crate while the door shut, and stayed shut. Vance walked around to the front again and tried the main roll-up door. Locked tight. But one hinge had cracked from years of weather, just enough to give him a sliver of sight inside. He knelt, peered in. Dust floated in shafts of fractured light. The floor was bare except for a broken chair, a few crushed soda cans, and near the far wall, what looked like the remains of an old kennel, bent bars, a torn strap. Nothing about it was official. It was makeshift, haphazard, like someone had needed to contain something just long enough. He stepped back, throat tightening. Then he took another photo. Back at the car, Vance sat in the driver's seat, engine off, hands on the wheel. He pulled out the file, scrolled through the report again. Graves's language was deliberate, detached, just enough to sound formal, just enough to avoid liability. Found juvenile in South Warehouse. Child responded to verbal greeting, no signs of distress. He flipped to the second page. A standard issue witness form. Blank. No signature from Sophia. No parent statement. The whole thing could have been filled out after the fact. His fingers found the edge of the printed photo mirror. 6 months ago, bandaged knee, wrapped in a blanket, eyes vacant. He held it beside the new photo. The locked door. The bent kennel. The memory trying to resurface through a child and a dog who had never been meant to testify. Then he opened a new file on his phone and typed just 3 words. Impossible by accident. He sat back and stared at the warehouse through the windshield. It didn't look threatening. It looked tired, empty, like a thing that wanted to forget what it had held. But buildings don't forget, and neither do dogs. By the time Detective Jonah Vance returned to his office at the precinct, the warehouse dust was still on his boots, and the photo from the sliver gap in the door still burned in the back of his mind. He didn't sit. Not yet. He unrolled the duty map, spread it across his desk, and marked the warehouse location with a small red pin. It wasn't the first one, and something in his gut told him it wouldn't be the last. He opened his laptop and began where the cracks had first appeared. Officer Nolan Graves's duty logs, pulled from the last 3 years. At first, the data looked routine. Beat patrols, traffic stops, community event security. But interspersed among the mundane entries were a handful of outliers, each marked juvenile recovery or missing child assistance. All closed. All minimal in detail. He clicked the first one. Case number G1327. Child recovered behind abandoned motel dumpster. No physical injury. Guardian retrieved on scene. He cross-referenced it with the GPS tracking from Graves's patrol car. The location was a field half a mile from the motel. Discrepancy. Second one. Case number G1420. Runaway reported in Trailer Park District. Child found hiding in drainage culvert. No further concerns. He pulled the timestamp, matched it with the body cam record. No footage available. Marked as battery malfunction. Third case, G1478. This one hit different. Female, 4 years old, reported missing from birthday party. Recovered in auto garage lot. No injuries observed. Vance remembered this one vaguely. A case that had never made the news. Just another child wandered off. He checked the parent report. The mother's original statement had been flagged by dispatch. She wouldn't leave the party alone. She's afraid of the dark. She doesn't like loud noises, something scared her. But that part had been omitted from the final filed version. Red flag. He sat now, finally, and pulled up the call audio archive. Most of the calls were fragments. Static, clipped words, bored dispatcher tones. But one from June 14th, case G1621, made him freeze. Dispatch, this is 6412. I've got the kid. Alone, but fine. Don't need backup. Vance hit rewind, played it again. Don't need backup. The phrase, shouldn't have meant anything. But once you heard it in that context, on that many calls, it was like a refrain, a shield, a trapdoor. He leaned back and stared at the wall at the map. The pins he'd now placed, one for each recovery Graves had personally logged involving a minor. 1 or 2 would have been a coincidence. There were 5, all within 8 months, all missing children found by the same officer, all alone, all unharmed, all unfollowed. No medical reports, no trauma evaluation, no escalation to CPS. He flipped open a fresh notepad and wrote across the top in block letters, "Untouched but not untouched." He returned to the GPS records. For each case, Graves had logged a temporary stop near an industrial site, a field, or a non-residential access point before the recovery was marked. A short pause. 3 to 8 minutes. Never more than 10. Enough time to open a door, to shut one, to tell a dog to stop barking. He sat in that chair for another 20 minutes, combing line by line, report by report. And what began as paperwork began to feel like graves being dug. Then he reached the final entry, one that hadn't been categorized as juvenile-related at all. A suspicious vehicle check. No child recorded. Just checked alley behind church, no further action. Except the GPS ping was 2 blocks from a house where a 4-year-old boy had been found crying the next day. Alone. Under a porch. The case had been ruled an unrelated domestic neglect call. Vance closed his laptop, leaned forward, elbows on the desk. 5 children. Same cop, same patterns, same silence. And 1 German shepherd who had broken the chain. Because dogs don't redact reports. Dogs don't file summaries. Dogs don't forget. He opened a secure chat line and messaged ADA Lorraine Shepherd, "We have 5 patterns. 2 already confirmed inconsistencies. Recommend emergency motion to subpoena all supplemental incident documentation under Graves's name. Immediate review." Then, after a moment's pause, he added, "And bring Annabelle back in. The dog's body remembers more than the files ever did." The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the storage facility lot, the kind of light that made everything feel just a little colder. Detective Jonah Vance stood outside Unit 311, the emergency warrant still warm in his jacket pocket. Behind him, 2 officers flanked the rusted corrugated door. Neither spoke. Beside them, Kyros waited. He wasn't wearing his badge. Not this time. This wasn't procedure. This was memory. With a nod from Vance, the bolt was cut. The metal screeched as the roll-up door peeled upward, inch by agonizing inch, until the stale air hit them like breath exhaled after too many years. The interior was dim. Dust motes floated through slanted beams of light slicing in from a cracked skylight. Vance didn't move at first. He just listened. Silence. Then Kyros let out a soft, guttural growl. Not loud, not aggressive, just ancient, familiar, like the echo of something buried. Vance flicked on his flashlight. The beam scanned across cardboard boxes stacked with military precision. Some labeled with dates, others with initials. A few bore the faded stamp of the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office. "Secure scene," Vance ordered, but his voice was distant, already pulled into the room. He stepped forward. The first box he opened wasn't filled with junk. Photographs, dozens. Some glossy, some printed from inkjets, all of children, most candid playgrounds, fairs, sidewalks, but several taken from odd angles, through fences, behind glass. One photo made his hand stop mid-turn. It was Mira, clutching a plush bunny, sitting alone on a crate, eyes wide, red-rimmed. There was a time stamp in the corner. Vance knew the date, the block party, the 2 hours. His jaw clenched. The next box held something else. A sealed bag labeled Collar, K9-147B. He tore it open. Inside lay a worn black collar. The nameplate was scratched but not unreadable. Kyros, Unit 147B. Hold the line. There were tiny flecks of something along the inside leather. Burn residue, rust, or blood. "Sir," one of the officers called softly. "Over here." They'd reached the back of the unit, past a set of metal shelving and a tarp-covered mound. As Vance approached, he realized it wasn't storage. It was a cage, an industrial-grade dog kennel, the kind used in transport, not training. The kind that wasn't meant to comfort but to contain. It was rusted at the edges, the bolts were blackened, and along the inside walls, scratch marks, deep, frantic, etched into the metal like clawed cries, desperate, silent. Vance dropped to one knee. Kyros followed, unprompted. He sniffed once, twice, then backed away tail down, ears flat, and lay down beside the cage. He didn't growl. He didn't bark. He just stared. Not at Vance, not at the officers, at the cage, like a grave. Vance's throat tightened. "How long were you locked in here?" he whispered. There was no answer. But then Kyros pressed his nose gently to the edge of the cage. One paw touched the scratched floor, and Vance saw it. Near the bottom hinge, faint but unmistakable, a smear, dark, dried. Testing would confirm it, but Vance already knew. Blood. He stood quickly, forcing the bile down. On a side shelf was a hard drive, encrypted, labeled with a strip of duct tape. Alpha Drop 1, lock cam. Next to it, a whip, not police-issued, handmade, black leather, coiled. The tip was crusted. Vance didn't touch it. He didn't have to. Behind him, one officer murmured, "Jesus Christ." Another made the sign of the cross. Vance turned back to Kyros. The dog hadn't moved. Just stared at the cage like it was still holding someone, like it might still hold part of him. He looked at the collar again. He'd worn it once, hadn't he? Before it was taken. Before someone unbuckled it and said, "Not a partner anymore. Just a tool." But he hadn't broken. He hadn't turned. He had remembered. Vance stepped outside for air. The sun was gone now. Only a bitter orange hue clung to the edge of the horizon. He made one call. Lorraine Shepherd picked up on the first ring. "Tell the judge," he said, voice tight. "It's not just obstruction anymore. We're dealing with something else, something darker." "Evidence?" "More than enough. We have proof of tampering, private detainment, physical abuse. And—" he glanced back inside at the steel bars that once held a hero. "We have a dog who lived it." Lorraine was quiet. Then she said, "We're moving graves tonight." Vance nodded. "Good. Because after this, no one's going to say just a dog ever again." He hung up and knelt beside Kyros. "Not anymore," he whispered. "You don't go in cages. You open them now." Kyros blinked slowly. Then, at last, he stood. Isolation had a sound, a cold hum that vibrated through cement walls, a silence thick enough to taste. Nolan Graves sat alone at the metal table, wrists cuffed, jaw clenched. His uniform shirt had been replaced with gray detention cotton creased sharply, as if control could still be pressed into fabric. His eyes stared at nothing. He hadn't spoken in hours, not when they read him his rights, not when they booked him, not when they took the badge he once pinned with pride. He waited, because monsters don't fear chains, they fear exposure. The door opened. Graves didn't flinch at first, but then he heard the nails, a soft, deliberate click, click, click on tile. Measured, even, familiar. Kyros entered first. No leash, no handler's commands, just presence. He stepped forward and stopped exactly 5 feet from the table, eyes locked on Graves, ears alert, tail low, not wagging, not threatening, just watching. Then Jonah Vance entered. He didn't carry a file folder, just a single manila envelope, 1 photo, nothing more. He slid into the chair opposite Graves. No pleasantries, no questions yet. Graves' eyes flicked from the dog to the man, then quickly back to the dog. "Didn't think you'd bring him," he muttered. Vance didn't respond. Instead, he reached into the envelope and pulled out a photograph. He didn't slam it, didn't dramatize it, just placed it gently on the table between them, face up. Mira, wide-eyed, pale, sitting on a crate. Timestamp April 15th, 10:07 p.m. In the shadows of the warehouse, Graves looked at it, and for the first time, he blinked. "She remembered?" Vance said, voice low, steady. "You thought she wouldn't." Graves chuckled dryly. "She's 3. Kids lie." "No," Vance replied. "They try to forget. But this one, she remembered. And so did the dog." He nodded toward Kyros, who hadn't moved. "He barked at you in court, not trained, not prompted. He just knew." Graves scoffed. "It's a dog." "That's what you said last time, too." There was a pause, a long one. Then Vance added, "Funny, isn't it? The one witness you never counted on couldn't speak. And yet here we are." Graves's hands flexed slightly against the cuffs. "So what's the charge? Being alone with a lost kid?" "That's thin." Vance leaned in slightly. "We have surveillance from your storage unit. We found the cage, the collar, the whip, your little collection." Graves's lips twitched, but his eyes betrayed him just for a second. A flicker, the mask slipping. "That's not proof I hurt anyone," he said, quieter now. Vance raised an eyebrow. "You kept the collar, Nolan." He let the name hang in the air. "You kept it, after everything. You couldn't let it go, could you? Because deep down, it was the only thing you ever truly broke that didn't die." Graves' nostrils flared. "Kyros was mine," he growled. "No," Vance replied. "He was with you. That's not the same thing." Kyros took 1 step forward. Graves stiffened. Vance noticed. "Still afraid of him, huh?" "Not because he bites, because he remembers." Graves stood abruptly, chains rattling against the table bolt. "You don't get it. You people never did. I was cleaning the rot, fixing what parents wouldn't. You think I hurt her? I saved her." Vance stood too, calm as gravity. "You caged her." "She wouldn't stop crying," Graves snapped. 2 hours, non-stop. I just needed it to stop." Vance didn't move, didn't blink. "She cried because you weren't saving her. She cried because she was locked in the dark, and you shut the door." Graves' face twisted. It wasn't supposed to go that far. No, Vance said softly, pointing to Kyros. But he did. And he stayed. Even while you walked away. The silence returned. Thicker now. More suffocating. Kyros took another step forward. Graves backed up just an inch. You broke something in him, Vance continued, voice low. But not the part you thought. You broke protocol. You broke the law. You tried to break his purpose. He placed both hands on the table. But you didn't break his loyalty. The door creaked open behind them. A pair of officers waited outside. Vance looked at Graves one last time. She said something when we asked what happened that night. He turned toward the exit. Graves sneered. Yeah, what was it? Vance paused. She said, he barked at the man, but he never left me. He nodded to Kyros. Neither will we. The dog stared for another long breath, then turned, unprompted, and followed Vance out, leaving Graves alone. Again. But this time, the silence wasn't safety. It was a sentence. It didn't happen all at once. Confessions never do. They don't pour, they crack. At first, Nolan Graves sat in silence, still cuffed, still rigid, but different now. The weight of the photo, the sound of Kyros's nails on tile, the sentence Vance had left behind, it all clung to the air like ash after fire. He didn't hear the door open again, didn't notice the camera begin to record, didn't care, because something inside him was starting to splinter. Detective Jonah Vance re-entered with another officer, silent, neutral, standing back. This wasn't intimidation. It was protocol now. Vance didn't speak. He just placed a second folder on the table. It had names, dates, duty logs, GPS pings, redacted memos, unredacted photos. Graves stared at it. His lips parted, but no sound came. And then, quietly, like something rotten being unearthed, I wasn't alone. Vance didn't react. He let the moment breathe. Graves blinked, then looked down. You don't understand. I didn't start this. Go on, Vance said. Graves swallowed. I was just the cleanup. That's what they called me, not to my face, but it was clear. His voice had changed, not defiant, not arrogant, just tired. They gave me the keys. He looked up slowly. Eyes rimmed red, not from tears, from shame, or maybe the last pieces of guilt finally thawing. The warehouse, it wasn't random. It was marked. I never picked it. Vance leaned in, jaw tight. Who's they, Graves? Silence. Then, Sanders, Officer Victor Sanders, Patrol Division, Sector 4. Another name. Riley Cho, civilian IT tech. She altered the GPS logs, scrubbed timestamps, even fed fake alerts into dispatch. His voice trembled, not out of fear, out of relief, as if speaking was the only way left to crawl out of his own rot. And the third? Vance pressed. Graves hesitated. A long pause, his jaw clenched. Then, Captain Dwayne Harrow. Silence erupted in the room, a name not expected. Not that name. Graves nodded almost absently. He was the one who told me, we don't make waves, we plug leaks. His words. Vance sat back, stunned, but composed. How far does this go? He asked. Graves stared at the ceiling. Farther than me, farther than any of us thought it ever would. He looked down again, voice low. I told myself it was containment, temporary. Just hold the kid, make a note, call it found wandering. They always said the parents wouldn't press. Because the reports were sanitized, Vance murmured. Graves nodded. Riley made sure of it, and the captain signed off on the rest. Vance opened the folder slowly. 5 kids. Same pattern. I only handled 3, Graves said quickly, as if absolution lived in the number. But you knew about all 5. A beat. Graves exhaled. Yes. Vance looked at him. Why keep the collar? Graves' face folded inward. His voice cracked. Because it was the only thing that didn't lie to me. He looked at the corner of the room where Kyros had stood just hours earlier. He never trusted me, even before the others. He'd sit by the doors, watch me. I tried to retrain him, but his hand trembled, the cuff rattling. Some dogs don't unsee. Silence fell again. This time it didn't press. It mourned. Vance stood slowly. This won't save you. I know, but it might save others. Graves didn't respond. He didn't plead. He didn't protest, just stared at the photograph of Mira still sitting on the table. She deserved better, he whispered. Vance picked up the folder. The confession would be logged, processed. Names would go up the chain, and this time, no one was walking away clean. The storm didn't come with thunder. It came with silence. A hallway full of prosecutors moving too fast for eye contact. A printer screaming out warrants. Coffee cooling on desks that hadn't been sat at in hours. And a name, Kyros, pinned to a whiteboard like a compass needle pointing straight into the rot. Jonah Vance stood in front of it, arms crossed, jaw clenched. His fingers drummed against his elbow, but it wasn't impatience. It was pressure, the kind that builds behind damn walls. The board had photos now. 5 children. 5 thin files. Lines of red string looping from incident reports to names that should have never shared a page. In the center, right beneath the largest knot, was a photograph of Kyros, ears alert, eyes sharp, and underneath it, scrawled in marker, not just a witness. The words weren't official, but they were the truest thing on the wall. Behind him, District Attorney Malik Foster slammed a file shut and snapped, "We're not sitting on this another hour. Get me warrants for Sanders, Cho, and Harrow. Now!" His tone could have cut glass. An assistant DA moved to comply. Another already had the phone to her ear, voice taut as wire. Vance didn't turn. He just kept staring at the dog's photo. He whispered, low enough for no one but the room's ghosts to hear, "You were never just evidence." Behind him, the real Kyros stirred. He lay at Vance's feet, still wearing his duty harness, no longer with Graves, but not yet reassigned. His ears flicked at the sound of his name. Then slowly he lifted his head and looked up at the man who had finally believed the silence. Their eyes met. No words, no commands. Just understanding. This was never just about data. This was survival, memory, and loyalty unbroken by chains. Vance crouched beside him. A pause. A breath. "I'm sorry it took us this long," he murmured. Kyros didn't move, but the faintest flick of his tail brushed the floor. The door opened with a hiss. Officer Leah Marin entered, tablet in hand, her face pale. "They confirmed," she said. "There were internal logs. Deleted once, but we recovered them through Cho's backup cache." "What kind of logs?" Vance stood. Marin's fingers hovered just above the screen. "Surveillance data. It tracked Kyros's biometric responses inside the warehouse. He blinked. Wait, Kyros was wired? She nodded grimly. A hidden node in his harness. It monitored his stress, aggression, and vital signs, probably installed under the guise of training optimization. And? She turned the tablet around. The graph was unmistakable. At 02:43 p.m., Kyros's heart rate spiked. At 02:45, cortisol readings surged. At 02:47, he stopped moving. Flatline stress paralysis response. Then a slow rise again, consistent with trauma response in canines. He shut down, Marin whispered. He went still, not out of discipline, but because he was enduring it. Vance felt something cold pass through his chest, like shame laced with fury. They had wired the dog to study his pain. Did Graves know? Marin hesitated. We don't know, but Cho did, and she tagged the file Test Protocol 3A. That's not a training term. No one spoke. The storm wasn't coming. It was here, and it was inside the system. Keep digging, Vance said. We take them all down, every last one. He turned back to the whiteboard where Kyros's name remained pinned at the center of a quiet war. For the first time in a long while, the silence in the room wasn't from ignorance. It was from reckoning. And it had a tail. By sunrise, the courthouse didn't look like a courthouse anymore. It looked like a dam about to break. News vans lined the street's satellite dishes, turning like ears straining for a secret. Microphones thrust past police tape. Cameras clicking with the feverish hunger of a city desperate to turn justice into spectacle. Inside, it was quieter, but not calmer. The district attorney's conference room was packed. Staffers, trauma specialists, security personnel. No one sat. There was no time. At the head of the table stood Jonah Vance, arms braced on the edge, posture firm, voice low but sharp. She's 3. We don't put her on a stand. We don't push. We don't dramatize. She's not evidence. She's the reason we're still doing this. Everyone nodded. Across from him, Dr. Annabelle tapped the screen of her tablet. It projected Mira's psychological profile names, redacted for confidentiality, but the trauma clear in every bullet point. Flashbacks, dissociative memory, selective silence, and most recently, emotional regulation when near Kyros. Courtrooms are sensory landmines, Anna said. Fluorescent lights, clinking jewelry, dozens of strangers staring. She needs grounding, and she needs him. All eyes turned to the far end of the room. Kyros sat silently beside the door. No leash, no command, just presence. He was calmer now than he'd been in days, not because the storm had passed, but because the child he had once protected would need him again. And this time, he would be seen for what he was. A protector, a survivor, and, starting today, officially, a witness. That afternoon, Judge Hartley convened an emergency session behind closed doors. The courtroom was cleared of press. Sophia sat beside Mira in the empty gallery, arms wrapped loosely around her daughter, as Anna addressed the bench. Your Honor, in accordance with the Child Witness Trauma Protocol Act, I'm requesting accommodations, no direct cross-examination, no press in the room, and most importantly, continued presence of the K9 Kyros, within arm's reach of the minor at all times. Hartley raised an eyebrow. The dog is still a registered police animal. Is he part of evidence or support? Vance stood. He's both, sir. But today we're requesting something new. service witness designation under Section 14-3 of the Exceptional Circumstances Code. A silence. The court clerk looked up from her typing. Even the bailiff paused. That designation, the judge said slowly, has never been applied to an animal. Until now, Vance replied. Kyros isn't just a presence. He's the only consistent point of memory this child has. He didn't just see the crime. He endured it. He remembered her when no one else did. The judge studied the documents, the scar report, the biofeedback data, photos of Mira's hand resting on Kyros's fur, her voice soft but clear. He stayed with me. He barked at the man. Hartley closed the folder, then turned to Mira. The child looked up, eyes solemn but steady. Kyros sat at her side, unmoving. The judge leaned forward. Mira, do you want the dog in the room when you talk to us? She nodded. He smiled, just a little. Then that settles it. The gavel came down. Effective immediately, Kyros is granted service witness status. Outside the courtroom, the press exploded with the headline, German Shepherd granted witness status in child abuse trial. Some mocked, some doubted, but most leaned closer to their screens and whispered to themselves, what does that dog know? Back inside, Mira curled into Sophia's side, hand resting gently on Kyros' neck. Her thumb stroked the fur behind his ear. Vance knelt beside them. You ready? He asked softly. Mira didn't answer with words. She looked up at Kyros, then down at her own shoes and whispered, He was locked too, but he came back. That was all she said. But in that moment, it was enough to shake everything that had stood against her. For the first time in days, the courtroom was full and quiet. Not the stiff, procedural quiet of legal formality. This was something else. A held breath. A kind of reverence. The way people go silent when a truth too big for words prepares to walk into the room. At the defense table, Nolan Graves sat in a navy suit, a tie slightly askew. His hands were cuffed beneath the table, hidden from view but not from judgment. His jaw remained tight, eyes darting toward every camera lens, every movement from the gallery. But when the main doors opened, he flinched, because it wasn't a lawyer, not a cop, not a judge. It was her, tiny feet, socked in lavender, a white dress wrinkled from the car seat, and beside her, matching her every pace, a dog with silvering fur and a gaze that had seen war. Mira and Kyros. They stepped forward together, each stride short and deliberate. The leather harness vest on Kyros bore a patch sewn just that morning. Service witness, do not disturb. Judge Hartley looked over the rim of his glasses. No words, just a slight solemn nod. Sophia, sitting behind the child, fought every instinct to run forward, to hold her, to shield her again. But she didn't, because Mira was walking on her own, and the courtroom watched in awe. When they reached the small chair placed near the witness bench, Mira paused. Kyros did too, placing his front paws directly in front of hers. His ears turned toward her, not the judge, not the man at the defense table, only her. Annabelle knelt beside Mira and whispered something no one could hear. Mira gave the smallest nod. She didn't sit on the chair. Instead, she knelt beside Kyros and placed both hands on his shoulders. The stenographer blinked. This wasn't in any transcript. The bailiff didn't move. The judge didn't stop it, because whatever was about to happen had outranked the rules. Miss Mira, Hartley said gently. "Do you remember why you're here today?" She nodded, didn't speak. "That's all right," he said. "You can tell us however you'd like." Mira reached for her small drawing pad, passed quietly by Anna. On it were already several pages. Scribbles, a tree, a square-shaped room, a door with bars, and on one page 2 figures, a man with dark glasses, and a dog with its head lowered. Mira pointed at the dog. He barked. She pointed at the man. He was mad. Graves shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Kyros didn't move. His body was still, but his nostrils flared slightly like he recognized the scent of that moment, of the fear, the metal, the closed space. Mira whispered, just loud enough for the microphone. "He locked me." But the dog stayed, even when it hurt. Gasps didn't erupt. Not this time. The courtroom didn't need to react. The truth had already passed judgment. The prosecution didn't ask more. The defense didn't dare. When Hartley thanked Mira, she didn't say anything. She simply reached over, placed her cheek against Kyros's shoulder, and whispered, "You're not locked anymore." And Kyros did something no one expected. He bowed his head, one paw sliding gently forward, and rested it on her foot. As the two turned to walk back toward Sophia, Vance caught Graves watching, staring, as if seeing a ghost. But maybe it wasn't fear. Maybe it was memory, because he knew what that dog remembered. And this time, the world knew it too. The lights above Courtroom 2 buzzed faintly. The kind of sound no one notices until silence sharpens the air like glass. Everyone had returned to their seats, but the room wasn't the same. Not after that. Not after a little girl in lavender socks and a white dress walked forward, not to accuse, not to cry, but simply to show what had been true all along. And not after a dog, graying and gentle, had rested his head on her foot like it was the most natural place in the world. Now, Assistant District Attorney Lorraine March stood behind the podium. Her notes were neat, her voice steady, but her knuckles were white where they gripped the edge of the wood. She looked out across the room, at the jury, wide-eyed, at Graves, stone-faced, at Mira, nestled beside Kyros, who hadn't moved an inch, and then Lorraine spoke, not with fire, not with fury, but with something more dangerous, stillness. "Your Honor," she began, "members of the court." She reached into a folder, pulled out a single photograph. The courtroom monitors flickered on as the image appeared. A child's small hand, resting gently on the broad, furred head of a German shepherd. His eyes closed. Her face turned downward, a moment caught between chaos and peace. "This was taken 10 minutes ago," Lorraine said, voice quiet. No staging, no prompting, no order given. She paused. "She's 3 years old. She's been through something no child should ever endure. There are no perfect words for that. But she found 2. Lorraine turned to the jury box. Her voice didn't rise, but it cut deeper. "He stayed." You could hear someone sniff quietly in the 3rd row. A tissue pulled, a throat cleared, but no one looked away. "She didn't say he barked, or fought, or bit anyone," Lorraine continued. "She didn't describe fear. She didn't name her pain. Because to Mira, what mattered most was that this dog, this living being once considered a piece of equipment, stayed." Another silence. But it wasn't empty. It was filled with every second Kyros had endured, locked away, punished, forgotten, because he refused to leave a child behind. Lorraine lifted her gaze to the judge.
He was supposed to be a tool, assigned, obedient, disposable.
She looked at Graves now. But he wasn't. Then to the gallery. He was present. He stayed by the door. He barked when she cried. He stood between her and the man with keys. And when punishment came, he took it. Sophia was crying now. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, like something too sacred had finally cracked open. And Jonah Vance, sitting at the end of the bench, had his eyes closed, one hand resting over his badge. Lorraine lowered the photo. There's a reason this courtroom went quiet the moment she pointed at him. Not because she said something dramatic, but because, for the first time in this case, we all heard truth spoken with no agenda. She took a breath. And the one who confirmed it doesn't have a voice. Her eyes flicked toward Kyros. But he remembered. And that was enough. Judge Hartley leaned back in his chair. His gavel remained untouched. Because what could be said after that? The gallery didn't applaud. No one moved. But somehow, a verdict had begun taking root, not by law, but by something far more ancient. A dog stayed, and a child lived. There was no gavel strike, no shouting, no cameras, just a single sentence, steady and quiet from a voice that once commanded a K-9 unit. I plead guilty on all counts. The courtroom held its breath. Judge Hartley gave a single nod. The court stenographer froze, then resumed. Nolan Graves sat in his orange jumpsuit, smaller now, not because of the uniform, but because the mask was gone. The badge was stripped, and the posture of authority crumbled beneath chains of his own making. He didn't look at Mira, or Kyros, or blink at the sentence. 40 years. No parole. But this was only the beginning. Behind closed doors, Graves's confession opened floodgates. He named names. Officer Mallory Dean of Internal Affairs, who buried misconduct reports for promotions. Sergeant Troy Keller, once praised for rescues, now exposed for losing evidence files. Elias Crane, the quiet technician who deleted footage, made logs vanish, and buried truth. It unraveled fast. Dean resigned by afternoon. Keller was arrested shredding documents. Crane walked into the DA's office with a trembling hand and a flash drive. That drive revealed 8 years of erased evidence. 7 children's names, 5 locations, 3 dogs transferred. A chilling folder labeled, redacted by directive, Ops Clearance. Ghost Hound. Lorraine Shepard, the DA, turned pale, reading it. Jonah Vance was speechless. Even Kyros, that night, whimpered in his sleep. The city reeled. Headlines shouted, Badge Corruption Ring. Hero Dog turns State's Witness. But beyond the noise, something deeper shifted. Mira wasn't just a child anymore. She was a voice. Kyros wasn't just a K-9, he was proof. At the press conference, the city seal gleamed, but the cameras focused on Kyros, seated beside Mira in her simple blue dress. Day Lorraine stepped up, no notes, no hesitation. We failed, not because we lacked policies, but because we thought policies were enough. Her voice, steady. When a 3-year-old remembered what officers forgot, when a retired K-9 bore scars, no one reported. When justice moved because a child pointed and a dog didn't look away, this wasn't a personnel problem. It was a culture problem. Then came the change. Lorraine held up a signed directive. All K-9 deployments now had independent welfare oversight. All child response officers would receive trauma-informed training. All K-9s, active or retired, would get annual wellness checks. They called it the Mira K Initiative. Mira didn't understand it all, but when Kyros thumped his tail gently, that was enough. Reform moved fast. A canine advocacy review board was formed, composed of experts and civilian parents. Operation Blue Hinge began auditing all canine units. Some kennels closed, units reassigned. Kyros was formally retired, not because he had to be, but because he'd earned it. Months later, at a quiet ceremony, Kyros received the department's first-ever Medal of Integrity. No speeches, no clapping, just Mira tracing the plaque that read, "To the one who stayed, when no one else did." Lorraine whispered as she left, "It's not about the badge anymore. It's about what comes after." In a hospital room, Kyros rested on a mat, his harness and tag gone. Mira sat cross-legged, her fingers gently tracing the scar at his neck. When Jonah Vance asked if she'd like to say goodbye, she spoke softly. "He's not leaving." Jonah tried to explain. Kyros was done with court, ready to go home. "This is his home," Mira answered, sure and steady. Sophia, her voice cracking, confirmed it. "We submitted adoption papers. The judge approved it this morning." Jonah blinked. "You're keeping him?" "No more kennels, no more cages," Sophia said. "He's with us now, if he wants to be." Kyros didn't move at his name. He moved when Mira whispered, "You can sleep now." He lowered his head into her lap. His tail thumped once out of trust. 3 days later, the adoption paperwork cleared. Kyros was no longer state property. His records reflected both his service and his trauma. And thanks to a new clause quietly proposed by Lorraine, any canine found to have suffered abuse would be granted early retirement and placed in trauma-informed homes. They called it the Kyros Clause. At home, life changed. The space beneath the stairs became Kai's cave. Kyros adjusted slowly. He no longer barked at the door or flinched at locks. Each night he curled beside Mira's bed, not guarding, just staying. One afternoon, Sophia found a crayon drawing taped to Mira's wall. 2 stick figures. Mira. Kyros with a little pink circle on his chest, a badge. Above them, in messy handwriting, "Not goodbye." And below, "Family." Sophia sat holding that picture, trembling, not from sadness, but from the quiet relief of knowing some endings aren't endings at all. The sun dipped low, casting soft orange light across the small backyard. The patchy grass still held the day's warmth. A wooden fence creaked gently in the breeze, and for the first time in months, the wind chime above sang a hesitant tune. Kyros stood still, not from fear, but because it had been so long since he'd seen a yard not enclosed in chain link and cement. Slowly he stepped forward, paws sinking into warm earth as if touching something new, something fragile. Near a worn azalea bush he paused, ears alert, sniffing the wind. A small voice broke the quiet. "You remember here?" Mira sat cross-legged beyond the screen door, watching him carefully. No smile, no play. Just seeing him. Kyros turned, tail thumping once against the dirt. Mira's mouth curved. Not quite a grin, but warmer, older than her years. Sophia stood in the doorway behind her daughter, arms folded, knowing this was theirs. A moment born of survival, grown into something gentler. Kyros had only been in their home 2 days. He still flinched at slamming doors, only ate with Mira nearby, and hadn't barked once. But he slept beside Mira's bed, his back against the wall, as if he knew it was there not to trap him, but to hold him. That afternoon, Sophia dragged out an old kiddie pool, hosed it off, and filled it halfway. Mira brought a faded tennis ball. When Kyros saw it, his ears twitched, his first flicker of play. But when Mira tossed it, he didn't chase it. He walked to her, sat down, and leaned in. "Not yet?" she asked. No answer. Just his shoulder against her leg. This was enough. Inside, Sophia clipped a new tag onto his collar. No rank, no badge, just a wooden oval. One side, Kyros. The other, stayed. He didn't flinch. He looked at her, blinked slowly, as if for the first time he trusted her enough to look away. That night, Mira left the window cracked. Outside, kids rode bikes, a dog barked, someone mowed too late. Inside, no barking, no pacing, just the steady breathing of a dog who had finally laid down his duty and chosen to stay. The storm rolled in after midnight low thunder, wind tugging at the gutters, lightning flickering like a memory trying to break in. Mira stayed asleep, one arm draped over the bed's edge, fingers nearly brushing the floor. Kyros lay beside her, head on crossed paws, half-lidded eyes watching. Thunder cracked, the house creaked. Mira twitched in sleep, but didn't wake. Kyros didn't bark, didn't move. Once, thunder meant orders, chain-link fences, fear. Now, it was just noise. Mira was safe. Sophia stood in the hall, robe clutched, glass of water forgotten. She'd come to check on Mira, but froze at the doorway. There he was, the dog who once couldn't be left alone, now still and calm, guarding not a crime scene or a perimeter, but a child's peace. Rain deepened, steady, gentle. A bolt of lightning lit the room, catching Kyros's tag, stayed. It gleamed, then faded. At 2:17 a.m., Mira whimpered, a soft sound, like a dream trying to cling to something it shouldn't. Kyros lifted his head, scooted closer, touched the blanket with his nose. Mira sighed, her arm dropping over his head. He stayed, head under her hand, breathing slow, eyes open. By 3 a.m. the house was still, but something had shifted. Kyros wasn't reacting out of duty. He was choosing to stay, choosing to guard not out of command, but out of love. The storm eased to a whisper. Kyros blinked, lowered his head, listening, present. This was peace earned, not given. Morning came quietly. No alarms, no courtrooms, just cinnamon oatmeal, ticking clocks, and sunlight warming the floor. Mira, hair damp from her bath, sat at the kitchen table, sweatshirt with a faded rocket ship, yellow pencil in hand. Kyros lay nearby, one eye open, one ear twitching. Just there. Sophia wiped the counter, glancing over, almost not believing it was real. Mira hadn't drawn since the trial, since the day everything was pulled from her memory and laid bare in court. But now she started hesitant lines, two simple shapes. A girl, a dog. No faces, no color. Just silhouettes. Sophia watched as Mira added shaky letters. He stayed. So, I wasn't scared. Kyros rose, stretched, walked to Mira's side, resting his chin on the table's edge. Mira smiled, honest, unteachable. She picked up a blue pencil, drew a third shape, a glow between the girl and the dog. Not a sun, not a lamp, just light, something safe. something that hadn't existed that night in the warehouse but lived now on her terms. Sophia knelt beside her. "Is that you, Sweet Pea?" Mira nodded, tracing the dog's outline. "That's Kyros," she whispered. Sophia smiled through tears. "It sure is." The drawing stayed on the table all morning, untouched, sacred. It wasn't just art. It was testimony in a child's language. Later, Sophia slipped it into a plastic sleeve, not to hide it, but to protect it. She hung it on the fridge beside court papers and grocery lists. There it stayed, not as proof of pain, but proof of what came after. In a world that tried to take Mira's voice, that tried to strip Kyros's purpose, this was their answer. He stayed. So I wasn't scared. No court could erase that. No monster could unmake it. It was drawn now in ink, in trust. And like him, it would stay. The courthouse steps had never felt like this. Not cold, not formal, but alive. The late spring breeze carried the scent of lilacs. Reporters whispered instead of shouted. Even the security guards, usually stiff-backed and stone-faced, stood with a kind of reverent calm, their hands folded in front of them, not behind. A small crowd had gathered, not for a trial, not for an indictment, but for something rarer, a beginning. At the center of it all stood a bronze plaque, just recently unveiled, sunlight catching on the crisp engraving. The Mira K Initiative, for those who speak without words, in honor of survivors and the animals who stood by them. A hush fell over the gathering as District Attorney Lorraine Shepherd stepped to the microphone. Behind her, Mira stood in a pale yellow dress holding Sophia's hand, and beside her, chest out, tail still, ears alert, stood Kyros. The harness across his shoulders now read, "Therapy Support, Court Certified," a new badge, a new title, but the same dog who never left her side. Lorraine's voice was clear, steady. "This program began with a question," she said. "What if healing didn't come in testimony, but in trust? What if justice didn't just mean accountability, but safety?" She turned slightly, eyes on Mira. "What if a child didn't have to speak, because a dog already had?" There were murmurs of agreement, soft nods, a few discreet tears wiped away with jacket sleeves and tissue corners. Lorraine continued, "The Mira K Initiative will train and deploy certified therapy canines for trauma survivors in legal proceedings. It will review past deployment records. It will protect those who cannot protect themselves." Her voice softened. "And it exists because of a little girl and a dog who stayed." Sophia squeezed Mira's hand. Mira looked up, not fearful, just quiet, taking it all in. There were cameras now, and microphones, but none of it seemed to matter. Kyros stood still, his nose tilted faintly toward the breeze, as if smelling something old and familiar, the courthouse hall where he once waited, alert, afraid, loyal. But today, he wore no fear, just purpose. After the speech, Lorraine invited Mira forward. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Instead, she placed her hand gently on Kyros's head, right above the new badge. A few photographers snapped the shot, but most people just watched in silence. A reverent kind of silence, like watching truth take a bow. The event wound down slowly. Volunteers handed out brochures. A local artist unveiled sketches from the original trial, one of them a replica of Mira's drawing, 2 silhouettes, captioned with her words. Sophia wrapped her arms around her daughter. "You did it," she whispered. "You helped change everything." Mira didn't answer, but she reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded square of paper. She handed it to Lorraine. Inside was a new drawing. A girl, a dog, and a third shape now, a courthouse. Above them, a small line of text. He stayed, so I could walk in. Kyros turned slightly, ears twitching, and for the first time in months, maybe years, he let out a single quiet bark. Not a warning, just acknowledgement, a sound that echoed across stone steps and old fears and into the hearts of everyone listening. The facility didn't look like much from the outside. A converted barn on the edge of the county line, all weathered planks and new fencing, with the faint smell of cedar and hay clinging to the morning fog. But inside, there was a hum. Quiet. Healing. The Echo program, they called it. A pilot rehabilitation center for working dogs pulled from abusive units, canines like Kyros, trained for duty, then discarded when no longer useful. It hadn't existed 3 months ago. Now it buzzed with purpose. And this morning, Jonah Vance stood in the center of it. He passed kennels where old scars met new beginnings. A yellow lab missing half an ear barked once, then settled. A Malinois paced in calculated figure eights, cautious, not wild. A shepherd with trembling haunches curled in a blanket and didn't move. Jonah paused there, crouched down, waited. No command, no reach, just breath. The shepherd watched him with wide, fractured eyes. Female, maybe 6 or 7. Fur matted in places, collar too tight. She didn't growl, didn't whimper, just watched. Jonah removed his badge, then his jacket, and finally, after a minute of silence, he spoke. Not loud, just enough for her to hear. "You don't have to speak," he said. "Not anymore." The dog didn't move, but her ears tilted forward, just slightly. A staff member approached. "She came from the Camden unit," they whispered. "They called her Sage. Was in isolation most of her working life." Jonah nodded. The name meant something. He'd read the file, buried in a folder marked "Retired Asset," like she was equipment. But there were scratches behind her ears that told another story, and a refusal to meet a handler's eye, not fear, not defiance, just the memory of not being heard. He stayed crouched. "She's one of the lucky ones," the staff member said. "Most of them don't even make it here." Jonah looked around at the other kennels. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of stories never spoken, orders never questioned, pain never named. He looked back at Sage. "You were supposed to protect," he said softly. "But no one protected you." The dog blinked slowly. Then, with a motion barely visible, she lifted one paw just an inch off the blanket. Jonah didn't reach for it. He just nodded. "I see you," he whispered. Outside the barn, a new sign was being mounted. The Echo program, for those who served, for those who stayed silent, for those we failed once. Sponsorships had begun flooding in after the trial. Kyros's image, silhouetted against courthouse marble, had become more than a symbol. He was a reminder. Dogs don't choose the uniforms they wear, but they remember everything about the ones who held the leash. Inside, the air shifted. A low, tentative whine came from a kennel 2 rows down, then another. Not panic, not distress, but the beginning of trust. Jonah stood slowly, nodded to the staff. "I'll be back," he said. not to check boxes, to listen. And as he turned to leave, he glanced once more at Sage. She had stood now, just barely, still shaking, still unsure, but on her own feet, facing the light at the door. The field was open, wild, and honest. It hadn't been landscaped into perfection or trimmed for show. The grass rose in soft waves, swaying under a golden sky as if exhaling. A narrow dirt path cut through it, not because someone had carved it, but because someone had come back to it again and again. Familiar feet, small feet, 4 paws. Mira's laughter carried first light, unburdened, real. And then the sound of Kyros's paws thudding beside her, steady, strong. He didn't run ahead, he didn't chase. He stayed beside her, always beside her. From the edge of the field, Sophia watched, one hand shielding her eyes from the afternoon light, the other holding a photo creased at the corners, worn with retelling. In it, a tiny hand rested on a large patch of sable fur. No faces, no courtroom, just contact, just truth. The photo had been taken after the trial, right before the verdict. No one had staged it, no one had posed. Mira had simply reached out, and Kyros hadn't moved. It had become the image carried across newspapers, reform campaigns, and posters in precincts from here to the Capitol. But it wasn't the photo Sophia held today. Today, it was personal. Across the field, Mira stopped running. She dropped into the tall grass with a quiet thud, limbs sprawled, chest rising and falling in rapid gulps of air, but smiling. That kind of smile that had no mirror in her past, only in her now. Kyros sat beside her, not panting, not playful, just watching. He didn't sit like a dog on duty. He sat like a sentinel who'd finally been given a reason to rest, not from weariness, but from peace. And in the hush between wind and breath, Sophia heard Mira speak. "He remembers this place." Sophia blinked. "What, sweetie?" Mira looked back, her voice steadier. "It's where we came after Grandma died. The first place he didn't bark at anyone." Sophia tried to respond, but the lump in her throat swelled too fast, too sharp. She knelt, opened the photo again, then folded it and pressed it to her chest. This field had once been a detour, a stop on a grief-stricken drive, a forgotten piece of land with no meaning. But now it was theirs. Kyros stretched out beside Mira. The girl leaned into him, her head resting against his neck. No words exchanged, no tricks, no commands, just breath syncing with breath. A hawk circled high above, but neither looked up. Wind tugged gently at Mira's braid. Kyros's ears flicked at a distant rustle, but he didn't rise, because there was no danger here, no cages, no dark places, no locked doors, only sky. And the girl who said, "He stayed." Sophia stepped forward, careful not to break the moment. She crouched nearby, still at a distance. Then, gently, she laid the folded photo in the grass. Let the wind take it or bury it. It didn't matter now, because the proof wasn't in a picture. It was in front of her. A girl who could finally run without looking over her shoulder. A dog who no longer trembled at doorways. A bond that had never needed language to be understood. The sun began to dip lower. Mira stood slowly, brushed her knees, looked to Kyros. He rose too, like he'd always known when she was ready. They turned together, walking toward Sophia. And as they did, the last rays of light caught on Kyros's badge, shining just enough to read what was engraved beneath his name. He stayed. Some truths bark, some whisper, Some are drawn in crayon by quiet hands, but all of them, every single one, deserve to be heard. And this time, finally, one was. He stayed. At its heart, this story isn't just about a courtroom or a crime. It's about loyalty that never wavered, even in the darkest moments. Kyros, like so many German shepherds around the world, reminds us that dogs aren't just pets. They are protectors, witnesses, healers. They sit silently beside trauma, absorbing what we can't say. They stay when others leave. Through Mira's quiet bravery and Kyros's unspoken devotion, we're reminded that true guardianship comes not from force, but from presence, from simply being there when it matters most. Let this story be a tribute not only to the courage of survivors, but to the animals who walk beside them, sometimes forgotten, but never failing. It's a call to listen more closely, to protect the voiceless, and to value the bonds we can't always explain. Because sometimes a bark is a warning, sometimes it's a cry, and sometimes it's a promise. To all the dogs who stayed, thank you. May we always be worthy of them.